especially given the current state of parts of our world. I want to talk about Palestine and what it is and what it isn't. Given the Arab-Israeli, or however you want to define it, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, it's commonly understood as a territorial dispute. The common thought is this. In the territory of the land of Israel, there used to reside 1,000-year-old Arab or Palestinian people that have been forcibly expelled or evicted by Zionist Jews. That's the idea, that these Palestinian people have been in that land. It was their land for 1,000 years. The Zionist Jews came in and kicked them out. And that's kind of the tension and why there's fighting going on right now. Given the media coverage that I see or hear about the war between Israel and what they say is Palestine and the Palestinians, I feel I need to comment a little bit first on what Palestine is. I'm going to do another little video on who the Palestinians are, then another little video on what's really going on behind the scenes today. I saw a statement by BLM that said, and I quote, "We are a movement committed to ending settled colonialism in all forms and will continue to advocate for Palestinian liberation." I'm more convinced now than ever, and I'm growing more so, that many people are just simply ignorant of truth. And not that I know it all, but the more that people engage in social media, the more that they are, the more that their opinion, their view is simply reinforced. That's the nature of social media. We hear one perspective most of the time. We argue one perspective. And then we give adherence to those who have this exact same perspective. It's interesting. It's the very charge that was leveled against former President Trump. It's said of him that he governed via Twitter, which is a one-sided medium. Nobody can argue with it. But yet I see so much of that happening in the vast majority of people's lives with social media. You got one perspective. They keep insulated by that one perspective, and people who have their same perspective, there's no dialogue, there's no real search for truth, there's just the fortification of a belief already held. So let's just look at some historical facts. I suggest to you that there never was a Palestinian country, and there never really was a Palestinian nationality. Proponents of both are either ignorant or they're outrightly deceptive for nefarious purposes. Let's talk first about what is Palestine. The Romans in the 1st century CE used the word Syria Palestina for Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. It's really a misnomer. In Greek, Palestina means literally the home of the Philistines, and so what they called Jerusalem and the surrounding area was the home of the Philistines. However, the Philistines never occupied that part of Israel. They stayed more in the very tiny sliver of coastal lands. They never went inland. When they first invaded the land, and yes, the Philistines invaded, they were the invaders of the land. They were wayfaring people, and they stayed in the coast, and they're on the cities of Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath. Goliath was from Gath, and Gaza, and they never even got close to Jerusalem, Jericho, nor Hebron. Some of those very cities that the Palestinians want as their own. Later, when Rome came and conquered the area of the land that we know as Israel, they called it the Kingdom of Judah. And then they renamed it the province of Judea, which means literally the home of the Jews. And so they renamed it the home of the Jews. However, eventually Rome came to rename it again back to Syria Palestina. For many different reasons. Some suggest that they were fearful of the Jews gaining in strength and population, and because the Jews seem to always, they came out of slavery and seem to have as part of their ethos the protection of enslaved and oppressed people. Rome being fearful that the other nations around them would rally to that and rally against Rome. Rome sought to eradicate them from the area. And so what ensued was the First Jewish War, the Diaspora Revolt, and the Second Jewish War. And in proportional terms, it's thought that In those three events, the Romans killed more Jews than even Hitler did. It was just atrocious. Then the Roman Emperor Hadrian came in and brought a bunch of Greeks in to settle the area and forbid Jews from being in the area under penalty of death. And the area was continued to be called Syria Palestina in an effort to eradicate the Jewish identity from the area. So in historical terms, the word Palestine means literally no Jews allowed. I mean, that's what it meant. And throughout the following centuries, gradually the word Palestine was used less and less and less and start to die out. Throughout the Turkish Ottoman Empire, that went on for hundreds of years. It was in the 16th century when one of the Ottoman rulers said this about that area: there's no administrative nor political entity called Palestine. So it had really just dropped from people's vocabulary from the face of the earth. It was in 1920, after gaining it from the Turks after World War I, that the British Empire revived the name Palestine. And so in 1920, they kind of took the British Empire took it back from the Turks after World War I, and revived the name Palestine. And then and they kind of drew up these arbitrary borders around what Palestine was. And then 2 years later, in 1922, they redefined these arbitrary Palestinian borders. And what they included in 1922 was about a quarter of the original scope of the borders that they had done in 1920. The interesting thing with that is there was this Arab historian who, in looking at the history of the land and the borders that were drawn and under the British Empire, he said there is no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not, he said. There's no. It's just this arbitrary drawing of borders that the British Empire came up with. Who were they to decide what was or was not part of the borders of Palestine? That Palestine was simply an artificial creation of the first Roman Empire and then the second renaming of that area. It's interesting, in 1956, a Saudi representative to the UN said this. He said, "It is common knowledge that Palestine is nothing but southern Syria. It is not the land of Israel." So it seems as though most people in the world and who understand history would agree that this idea that there is a Palestine and as a nation that has had a people group in it, for 1,000 years is just false. So what we see in the Middle East now in the Palestinian state is something other than our Americanized think of as a Palestinian state. It's Hafez al-Assad, the former dictator of Syria, told then that Yasser Arafat, who was he's the former chairman of the PLO. They're both dead now. But he said this to Yasser Arafat, the head of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He said, "Never forget this one point. This is the dictator of Syria. There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There's no Palestinian entity. Palestine is an integral part of Syria." And so when we see things that we see on the news right now, that big Israel is attacking poor little Palestine and the people of Palestine, those are smoke and mirrors. There is no Palestine nation. There are no Palestinian people as far as this. The people have been there 1,000 years, and big Israel's going to try and take their land from the Palestinian people. People in the know from way back in the early centuries, all the way up through the PLO, would agree that the idea of a Palestinian nation is a misnomer. So just keep that in mind when you see the news and the news reports or social media reports how to back Palestine because the Jews are trying to take over land and a country and a nation that is not theirs, trying to colonize that part of the world that is not theirs. Get that out of your head, because Palestine was never a country unto itself. It was never a nation. So more to come on who the Palestinians are and really what's going on in the next couple of videos.